From the ashes of a dying world, a new power would rise. Born on the rugged frontiers of Anatolia, it would grow into a vast empire, one that spanned 3 continents, ruled hundreds of millions, and shaped history for 6 centuries. This is the saga of the Ottoman Empire, a story written in ambition, faith, and blood. We'll witness how a small band of warriors, gnawing at the edges of a crumbling Byzantium, rose to dominate the known world. We'll stand beside sultans like Mehmed the Conqueror, who shattered the walls of Constantinople, and Suleiman the Magnificent, whose golden age defined an era. From the thunder of cavalry hooves to the disciplined volleys of the Janissaries, the first true standing army in Quincence, Europe will march through the empire's triumphs and its fall, a tale of rise, glory, and decline when the once mighty realm became known as the sick man of Europe. It all began in the late 13th century. Anatolia was fractured an open battlefield of fading powers and new ambitions. The Seljuks had fallen to Mongol invasion. The Byzantines clung to life in Constantinople, their empire a shadow of its former glory. To the south, the Mamluks ruled Egypt and the holy cities. And on the frontier, in a small town called Skut, a Turkic chieftain named Osman gathered his warriors, unaware that he was about to ignite one of history's greatest empires. How did this small frontier principality rise so meteorically to become a global superpower? The answer lies not merely in military might, but in a unique and pragmatic combination of strategies. A cornerstone of their early success was a policy of remarkable tolerance toward conquered peoples. This approach allowed Christian and Jewish subjects to retain their faith, customs, and local leadership, demanding only their taxes and loyalty in return. This minimized resistance and eased the burden of administration. Simultaneously, a strategic settlement policy relocated Turkic and Muslim populations from Anatolia to newly acquired lands in the Balkans. This secured the frontiers, broke up potentially rebellious local populations, and gradually transformed the demographic landscape of southeastern Europe, embedding Ottoman power deep within the continent. This pragmatic statecraft was fueled by a powerful warrior ethos, a holy war fought in the name of expanding the domains of faith. This ideology attracted thousands of fighters to the Ottoman banner, warriors from across the Muslim world, eager for glory and plunder on the Byzantine frontier. But unlike other frontier states that quickly burned out, the Ottomans were guided from their very inception by a fiercely centralized authority. From the beginning, the ruling family consolidated power, ensuring that the state did not splinter among various warlords. This unique combination of religious zeal, military prowess, and centralized, pragmatic governance created a relentless engine of expansion. The early Ottoman state was small, but its ambition was boundless, and it possessed the tools to realize that ambition. The Ottoman military machine was the engine of this expansion, a revolutionary force unlike any other in its time. The backbone of the army was a formidable cavalry force, supported by a unique system of land grants. In return for their service in war, these elite cavalrymen were granted the right to collect taxes from the peasantry in designated territories. This ingenious system created a self-sustaining army that cost the central treasury nothing, while also embedding loyal military commanders across the empire's vast territories. These horsemen were the hammer of the Ottoman army, capable of swift, devastating charges that could shatter enemy formations. But they were not the only weapon in the Sultan's arsenal. The true heart of the Ottoman military, its razor-sharp edge, was the Janissary Corps. Widely considered Europe's first modern standing army, these professional soldiers were a class apart. They were not feudal levies, but salaried warriors, paid directly from the Sultan's treasury and loyal only to him. In a stroke of genius, the Ottomans created this elite force from the sons of their Christian subjects in the Balkans through a levy system. Taken from their families at a young age, converted to Islam, and raised in a strict, monastic-like military environment, They were forged into the most disciplined and formidable infantry of their age. Armed with muskets and supported by a massive artillery train, the Janissaries were the anvil against which the Sultan's enemies were broken. A founder of the dynasty, Osman was a visionary leader who transformed his nomadic tribe into a functioning state. He was a master of the frontier, capturing key Byzantine fortresses and gradually expanding his domain. He understood the need for institutions, levying the first organized tax on local markets and minting the first Ottoman coin, a simple silver piece that was a potent symbol of his growing sovereignty. For years, he waged a war of attrition against the Byzantines, a slow but steady campaign of raids and sieges. But the true turning point, the moment his burgeoning state announced its arrival on the world stage, came in the year 1302. At the Battle of Baphaeus, Osman's warriors met a regular Byzantine army in open combat, and decisively defeated them. This was no mere raid. It was a formal declaration of intent. For many modern historians, this victory, not the traditional date of 1299, marks the true birth of the Ottoman state. The die was cast. A new power had arrived, and it would not be denied. Osman's son, Orhan, inherited his father's ambition and expanded upon it with a statesman's vision. He was not just a warrior, but a state builder. Under his command, the great Byzantine city of Bursa fell, a prize of immense strategic and symbolic value. Orhan immediately made it the new Ottoman capital, a clear signal of his permanent intentions. From this new base, his armies swept across northwestern Anatolia, capturing the cities of Nicaea and Nicomedia, securing the entire southern coast of the Sea of Marmara. At the Battle of Pelikanon, he shattered another Byzantine army sent to halt his advance. But his most fateful conquest was in Anatolia. By absorbing a neighboring maritime principality, he gave his landlocked state its first navy, a foothold on the strategic Dardanelles Strait, and a clear view to the ultimate prize, Europe. The crossing was now not just a dream, but an inevitability. A Byzantine civil war would soon provide the perfect opportunity. In a decision that would change the course of European history, a Byzantine claimant to the throne, desperate for military support, gifted Kimp Castle on the Gallipoli Peninsula to Orhan. The gift was gratefully accepted ... and never returned. It became the Ottoman foothold in Europe, a permanent military base from which they would launch the conquest of the Balkans. Orhan was more than a conqueror. He was a brilliant administrator. He established the first regular, salaried army, created the Grand Council of State, known as the Imperial Council, and appointed the first Grand Vizier to manage the growing bureaucracy. He minted the first standardized silver coins, founded the first Ottoman university in Iznik, and institutionalized the system of sending his sons to govern provinces, ensuring they gained the experience needed to one day rule an empire. He was laying the institutional bedrock for a world power. Murad I, the first sultan to ascend to the throne after being trained as a provincial governor, was a relentless and pious warrior. He pushed Ottoman expansion deep into the Balkans, capturing the strategically vital city of Adrianople, and in a stunningly bold move, making it his new capital in Europe. This was a clear statement that the Ottomans were in Europe to stay. His rapid conquests triggered the first great Christian coalition against them, a crusade aimed at driving them from the continent. At the Battle of the Maritsa River, the Crusader army was utterly annihilated. Yet the Ottomans also tasted their first significant defeat in the Balkans at Plosnik, a stark reminder that their expansion would be fiercely contested every step of the way. While his armies marched west, Murad consolidated Ottoman power in Anatolia, not through conquest, but through shrewd diplomacy, dynastic marriages, and outright purchase, a cautious strategy that his successors would soon abandon for the sword. In the year 1389, on the plains of Kosovo, Murad I faced another massive Crusader army, this time led by the Serbian Prince Lazar. The battle was a brutal, hard-fought affair, but it ended in a resounding Ottoman victory. shattering Serbian power for a generation. Yet, in the aftermath of his greatest triumph, tragedy struck. Murad, the victorious sultan, was assassinated as he surveyed the battlefield, becoming the only Ottoman monarch to die in combat. In the chaos of the moment, his son Bayezid was proclaimed sultan right there, amidst the dead and dying. To prevent the kind of succession crisis that had crippled so many other states, Murad I had earlier made a momentous change to the law of succession. The state, once considered the common property of the entire ruling clan, was now declared the sole domain of the reigning sultan and his sons. The path to absolute monarchy was being paved, a path that would be walked in the blood of his own descendants. Murad I's reign was a period of intense institutionalization, creating the structures that would support the empire for centuries. He formalized and expanded the formidable Janissary corps, drawing on a system that took 1/5 of Christian prisoners of war for state service. He also created the high offices of the Grand Vizier, a chief minister with immense authority, and the finance minister to manage the state's growing revenues. These new bureaucratic roles professionalized the Ottoman government. Future Janissaries would begin their rigorous training in a dedicated junior course before being promoted to the elite household troops of the Sultan. The most brilliant among them could even rise to the highest echelons of power, becoming provincial governors or even Grand Viziers themselves. The system was designed to create a ruling class of unparalleled skill, loyal only to the person of the Sultan. Ascending to the throne on the bloody field of Kosovo, Bayezid I immediately earned his nickname, the Thunderbolt, for the breathtaking speed and ferocity of his campaigns. He was the first to distribute a generous accession bonus to the Janissaries, a tradition that would become both a powerful tool for securing their loyalty and, in later centuries, a dangerous source of instability and financial strain. Bayezid abandoned the cautious Anatolian policies of his predecessors. He launched a lightning war that brought the remaining Turkic principalities from the Sakarya River to the Euphrates under his direct control, creating a unified Anatolian heartland. With his rear secured, he turned his full attention west and, for the first time in Ottoman history, laid siege to Constantinople itself, not once, but 4 times. The thunderbolt had arrived, and his gaze was fixed on the city of the Caesars. In 1396, a massive crusading army, drawn from the chivalry of France, Hungary, and across Europe, marched down the Danube to relieve the siege of Constantinople and drive the Ottomans from the Balkans. At the Battle of Nicopolis, Bayezid inflicted a catastrophic defeat upon them, a victory so complete and devastating that it sent shockwaves of grief and disbelief throughout the Christian world. But this triumph bred a dangerous overconfidence, a sense of invincibility that would prove to be his undoing. As Bayezid consolidated his power in the west, a new and even more formidable storm was gathering in the east. The great Turco-Mongol conqueror, Timur, known to the west as Tamerlane, was carving out his own vast empire in Central Asia. Insulting letters, laden with threats and bravado, were exchanged between the two proud rulers. A clash of titans, a battle for supremacy in the Islamic world, became inevitable. The Battle of Ankara in 1402 was a cataclysm for the Ottoman state. Bayezid's army, its Anatolian levies wavering in their loyalty to a sultan who had so recently conquered them, was utterly crushed by Timur's veteran forces. The Thunderbolt himself, the invincible conqueror of Nicopolis, was captured on the battlefield. The consequences were devastating. The hard-won political unity of Anatolia shattered as Timur restored the defeated principalities. The relentless Ottoman advance into Europe came to a screeching halt. The siege of Constantinople was lifted. The Ottoman state itself was plunged into an 11-year civil war, known as the Interregnum, as Bayezid's sons fought a brutal and destructive war against each other for the remnants of their father's shattered empire. The very survival of the Ottoman dynasty now hung by a thread. Out of the chaos and bloodshed of the Interregnum, one man emerged victorious, Mehmed I, his triumph in the brutal civil war, earned him the revered title of the state's second founder. His first and most crucial task was to patiently and meticulously rebuild what the catastrophe at Ankara had destroyed. He painstakingly began to re-establish Ottoman authority over the renegade Anatolian principalities, bringing them back into the fold through a combination of diplomacy and force. He formalized the child levy, the system of recruitment that would supply the Janissary corps for centuries to come. His reign was not without challenges. He fought the Republic's first major naval war against the powerful Republic of Venice, which ended in defeat. Yet his rule was also marked by the first major social and religious uprising in Ottoman history, the rebellion of a charismatic preacher whose radical message of communal property found fertile ground in the war-torn countryside. His son, Murad II, inherited a throne beset by challenges from all sides. He spent the early years of his reign suppressing rebellions from his own brother, Mustafa, and an uncle who claimed to be a long-lost son of Bazed, a pretender likely propped up by the Byzantines. The state, though shaken by the interregnum, was slowly and steadily regaining its footing. But in the West, the Christian powers sensed weakness. A peace treaty signed with the Kingdom of Hungary resulted in the first formal loss of Ottoman territory in Europe, as the Serbian despotate was restored. This diplomatic setback was compounded by the first-ever Janissary revolt over pay, a dangerous omen of the corps' growing power and sense of entitlement. Despite these early setbacks, Murad II proved to be a formidable military commander, a worthy successor to his warrior ancestors. At the Battle of Varna in 1444, and later at the Second Battle of Kosovo in 1448, he decisively defeated large crusader armies sent to drive the Ottomans from Europe. The Second Battle of Kosovo, in particular, was a pivotal moment in European history. If the Battle of Manzikert had opened Anatolia to the Turks, and the capture of Kimp Castle had opened the Balkans, then Second Kosovo sealed their presence there permanently. It was the final, desperate attempt by a unified Balkan coalition to expel the Ottomans. Their defeat was so total that it confirmed the Balkans as an irreversible part of the Ottoman domain for the next 4 centuries. Then came the son who would fulfill the ultimate Ottoman ambition, a ruler whose name would echo through the ages. In 1453, Mehmed II, known to history as the Conqueror, achieved the seemingly impossible. He marshaled the full resources of his empire, constructed massive cannons, and, in a stroke of military genius, dragged his fleet overland to bypass the harbor chain before launching a final, overwhelming assault. He breached the legendary, impregnable Theodosian walls and conquered Constantinople, ending the 1,000-year reign of the Byzantine Empire. The city, reborn as Istanbul, became the new capital of a burgeoning world power. Mehmed became a new Caesar, and his empire, now straddling 2 continents, was undeniably on the path to greatness. The fall of the city sent shockwaves across the world, marking for many the true end of the Middle Ages. With Constantinople as his capital, Mehmed the Conqueror launched a series of relentless campaigns to consolidate and expand his new empire. One by one, the remaining independent states of the Balkans fell to his armies. Serbia, the Morea in Greece, Wallachia, Moldavia, and the fiercely resistant Albania were all brought under his dominion. In Anatolia, he strategically conquered the breakaway Greek empire of Trebizond, eliminating the last Byzantine remnant. His most strategically brilliant move was the conquest of the Genoese colonies in the Crimea. This masterstroke gave him complete control over the Black Sea, turning it into what was effectively an Ottoman lake, and securing the lucrative northern terminus of the ancient Silk Road. After a brutal and costly 16-year war, he finally forced the great maritime Republic of Venice to sue for peace, granting them limited trade concessions in return for their submission and a hefty annual tribute. On land, only the fortress of Belgrade, the gateway to Hungary, managed to resist his siege, a prize that would have to wait for a future sultan. At sea, the island of Rhodes remained a defiant crusader stronghold. His final campaign was aimed at the heart of Christendom itself. He captured the Italian port of Otranto, establishing a beachhead for a planned march on Rome. Death, however, intervened, and the ambitious Italian campaign was abandoned. In the east, he decisively crushed the powerful Akoyunlu Turkic Confederation at the Battle of Atuk-Beli, securing his eastern flank and ensuring he had no rival for supremacy in Anatolia. Mehmed the Conqueror was more than a brilliant general. He was an empire builder of extraordinary vision. He centralized power with an iron fist, issuing a famous legal code that declared the state to be the sole and absolute property of the Sultan. He ceased to preside over the imperial council personally, elevating the office of the Grand Vizier and creating an aura of imperial distance between himself and the daily affairs of government. He built the magnificent Topkapi Palace, a sprawling complex that would serve as the nerve center of the empire for centuries. He also initiated the controversial policy of confiscating the wealth of overly powerful officials, ensuring that no family or faction could grow rich or influential enough to challenge the Sultan's absolute authority. He also reformed the very structure of the state's elite, systematically promoting officials drawn from the child levy system over the old Turkic aristocracy. These men, products of the palace school, were culturally sophisticated, multilingual, and most importantly, owed their entire careers and loyalty to the Sultan alone, further strengthening his central authority. He founded renowned universities, turning Istanbul into one of the world's leading centers of Islamic science and learning. And in a powerful symbol of his imperial power, he minted the first Ottoman gold coin. Defying conservative Islamic tradition, he even commissioned portraits of himself by famous European artists like Gentile Bellini, a clear sign of a ruler who saw himself not just as a warrior king, but as a successor to the Roman emperors, a true monarch of both East and West. The reign of Mehmed's successor, Bayezid II, is often seen as a period of consolidation, a pause within the ascent. His rule was immediately paralyzed by a protracted civil war with his ambitious brother, Sen Sultan. What began as a typical internal succession dispute quickly escalated into a major international crisis. After being defeated, Sem sought refuge first with the Mamluks in Egypt, then with the Knights of St. John on Rhodes, and finally he was transferred to the custody of the Pope in Rome. He became a valuable pawn for the European powers. For years, they used the threat of unleashing Sem, backed with an army, back into Anatolia to keep Bayezid's own military ambitions in check. This diplomatic blackmail effectively prevented any major Ottoman campaigns into Europe for over a decade, freezing the empire's expansion. Despite the paralysis caused by the Sem affair, Bayezid II did achieve some notable successes. He finally extinguished the powerful Karamanid Principality in Anatolia, a long-standing rival that had often allied with the empire's enemies. The first real military clashes with the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt began over control of the Holy Land of Mecca and Medina, a rivalry that would be settled decisively by his son. In a significant act of compassion and statecraft, his navy rescued tens of thousands of Sephardic Jews and Muslims fleeing the brutal Spanish Inquisition, bringing them to the safety of Ottoman lands. However, a new and far more dangerous threat was emerging on his eastern border: the rise of the charismatic and militant Shia Safavid dynasty in Persia. The Safavids, under their dynamic leader Shah Ismail, promoted a fervent and expansionist brand of Shia Islam that directly challenged the Sunni orthodoxy of the Ottomans. Their missionaries and agents spread throughout eastern Anatolia, inciting unrest among the local Turkmen tribes who felt marginalized by the central government. This culminated in a massive and bloody rebellion. Bayezid's cautious and passive response to this growing threat infuriated his youngest son, Selim, a hardened provincial governor who saw the Safavid danger in stark existential terms. In an unprecedented move, Selim, with the tacit backing of a frustrated Janissary corps, marched on the capital and forced his own father to abdicate the throne. A new, more ruthless and aggressive era was about to begin. Selim I, nicknamed the Stern, wasted no time in making his mark. In his short but incredibly eventful 8-year reign, he would dramatically expand the empire's borders and fundamentally alter its character. In 1514, at the pivotal Battle of Chaldiran, he confronted Shah Ismail and the Safavid army. The superior firepower of the Ottoman cannons and the disciplined musket volleys of the Janissaries shattered the fanatical cavalry charge of the Safavid horsemen. The victory was decisive, temporarily neutralizing the Persian threat and permanently securing eastern Anatolia for the Ottomans. He then turned his attention south, crushing the final independent Turkic principality in the region. With this victory, the political unity of Anatolia, first forged by Bayezid I and shattered by Timur a century earlier, was finally and permanently achieved. Selim then launched his most audacious campaign, targeting the wealthy and ancient Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt. At the battles of Marj Dabik in Syria in 1516 and Radania near Cairo in 1517, the Ottoman war machine, with its combined arms tactics, completely annihilated the traditional Mamluk armies. The victories delivered the entirety of Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and the Holy Lands of the Hejaz into Ottoman hands in a single lightning campaign. The empire's treasury overflowed with Mamluk gold. The lucrative spice road, the ancient trade route for spices from the east, now ran through Ottoman territory. And with the conquest came a prize of immense symbolic power, the Caliphate. The last titular Abbasid Caliph in Cairo formally transferred the title to Selim, making the Ottoman Sultan the spiritual leader of the Sunni Muslim world, a title they would not actively use for diplomatic purposes until their power began to fade centuries later. Selim's son, Suleiman I, known in the West as the Magnificent and in the East as the Lawgiver, inherited an empire at the absolute zenith of its power and wealth. His 46-year reign would be remembered as the Ottoman Golden Age. Yet, it began with a series of revolts in the newly conquered territories of Syria and Egypt, which he swiftly and brutally crushed. His primary focus, however, was Europe, where he faced a formidable and lifelong rival in the Habsburg Emperor Charles V, who ruled over a vast domain stretching from Spain to Austria. Suleiman's grand strategy was to prevent a united Christian front from forming against him. To this end, he cultivated a strategic, if unofficial, alliance with France, granting them extensive trade privileges as a diplomatic tool to keep the Habsburgs perpetually off balance. Suleiman's armies seemed unstoppable as they marched relentlessly into the heart of Europe. In 1521, he achieved what his great-grandfather, Mehmed the Conqueror, had failed to do. He captured the formidable fortress of Belgrade, the gateway to Central Europe. 5 years later, at the Battle of Mohacs, his army annihilated the forces of the Kingdom of Hungary in a stunningly swift and decisive battle that lasted only 2 hours. The Hungarian king was killed, and the medieval kingdom effectively ceased to exist. In 1529, in his most ambitious campaign, he stood before the very gates of Vienna, the Habsburg heartland, laying siege to the city. Though the siege ultimately failed due to overstretched supply lines and the onset of bad weather, it marked the high water point of Ottoman expansion into Central Europe and sent a shockwave of fear across the continent. A subsequent treaty with the Habsburgs in 1533 codified Ottoman dominance in the region. In a deliberate diplomatic humiliation, the Austrian Archduke was officially ranked as equal not to the Sultan, but to his Grand Vizier. Furthermore, Austria was forced to pay a substantial annual tribute, establishing both political and economic superiority over their chief rival. In the Mediterranean, Suleiman's forces were equally dominant. His conquest of the island of Rhodes in 1522 expelled the crusading Knights of St. John, securing the eastern Mediterranean for Ottoman shipping. Later, the great corsair admiral Barbarossa Hayreddin Pasha would join the Ottoman service, bringing with him the territory of Algiers and giving the empire a powerful presence in the western Mediterranean. In 1538, at the naval battle of Preveza, Barbarossa Hayreddin Pasha led the Ottoman fleet to a stunning and decisive victory over a much larger Holy League armada commanded by the Genoese admiral Andrea Doria. This victory secured Ottoman naval dominance in the Mediterranean for the next 3 decades. The North African coast, from Algiers to Tripoli, was brought under Ottoman control, creating a vast maritime frontier. A second major naval victory at Jerba in 1560 further confirmed this supremacy. However, the empire was not invincible. A massive and costly siege of the island of Malta in 1565 ended in a bloody failure, a major blow to Ottoman prestige and a turning point in the Mediterranean struggle. It was there that the legendary Ottoman admiral Turgut Reis fell in battle. Multiple naval expeditions into the Indian Ocean also failed to dislodge the newly arrived and aggressive Portuguese, a clear sign that a new global power dynamic centered on the Atlantic was beginning to emerge. Suleiman's long and glorious reign ended, as it had been lived, on campaign during the siege of Szeged in Hungary. His death marked the end of an era, the last of the great warrior sultans who personally led their armies into battle. The period that followed was defined not by sultans, but by powerful and brilliant grand viziers who effectively governed the empire. The first and greatest of these was Sokollu Mehmed Pasha, who served under 3 sultans and managed the affairs of state with a firm hand. During his tenure, the Aegean island of Chios, and most significantly, the rich island of Cyprus were conquered from Venice in 1571. The fall of Cyprus provoked a massive Christian response. At the Battle of Lepanto later that year, a Holy League fleet annihilated the Ottoman navy in one of the largest naval battles in history. But Sokollu, undeterred, famously told the Venetian ambassador, "In conquering Cyprus, we have cut off one of your arms. In destroying our fleet, you have merely shaved our beard. A cut-off arm will not grow back, but a shorn beard will grow back even thicker." And he was right. Within a year, a new, even larger fleet had been built. In the end, the Ottomans stood as one of history's greatest empires, born from the frontier, sustained by vision, and undone by the same forces that once made it unstoppable. From Skut to Constantinople, from Rhodes to Lepanto, their story is not just about conquest, it's about endurance, faith, and the relentless tide of change that no empire can escape. History doesn't fade, it echoes. If you'd like to hear more stories of the powers that shaped our world, subscribe, like, and stay with us, because this is only one chapter in the epic tale of civilization.